The Rat Patrol, was that a physically demanding role to play in that show?
Not really. Except when we filmed, well, yeah, kind of.
Did you do stunts yourself? Did you have to do your own stunts
yes,
sometimes?
a lot of them, most of them. Unless it was dangerous around explosions or whatever, then you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been stupid. But the Rat Patrol was, yes, physically demanding in the sense that we filmed usually, sometimes in the Mojave Desert later on, 90 degrees, 95 degrees, 100 degrees. And then when you have those bright lights shining at you, it's difficult to not squint. After 12 hours, 14 hours, it becomes exhausting, sure.
When Christopher George was injured in 1967, were you there then? Were you present?
I chased him. I was chasing him and in a Jeep. I was in a half-track, so on a dry desert bed in the Mojave Desert. I was chasing him. So, and then they flipped. And the thing that saved them was a gun, machine gun, and had an ammunition box sticking out this way, and it fell on that side and didn't roll over. That's what saved them.
The show lasted 2 seasons. Why do you think it ended after just 2 seasons?
I tell you why. I'd always suspected that when we did that in Spain the first year, because I speak some Spanish, I sometimes asked how much the extras cost in Spain. $1 a day. The Franco regime offered their tanks, everything, to us. And yet we had to come back here because it became too expensive. And we actors thought something is awry. That doesn't seem right. So then we came here and we produced it more cheaply here than in Spain. So someone had long fingers. Someone put money in their pocket.
When the series ended...
Do you understand? In other words, in Spain we could have done it for a fraction of what it cost here and would have survived, gone on for many more years.
There was a revelation about your character at the end of the series, playing a German officer.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a satisfying ending for you, that the character was shown to be anti-Nazi?
Sure, because at the end of the war, or in the middle of the war, there's some German plays written by soldiers, totally anti-Hitler, anti-Nazi, anti-all kinds of things. Some, not all, but mostly an utter disappointment and a sobering after that idiocy, that horror that was unleashed by an Austrian private and his cohorts. Let me say this about America as it pertains to the occupation of Europe afterwards. And I say this without any hesitation. We loved the American occupation. It brought a kind of, you just had a sense of fairness, a sense of casualness. We loved American music. Later on, Elvis Presley, Louis Armstrong, Lionel Hampton, Benny Goodman. We loved all that. We loved American culture. And we loved a sense of American fairness. So the influence of America on Europe cannot ever be underestimated. It's extraordinary, extraordinary. Mostly positive. I would say 90% of it positive. But you needed to stay in a country like that for a long time, for democratic institutions to take hold. We were in England, England, which is an island, really. Why do you think democratic institutions came along slowly in England, slowly in America? Because essentially both England and America are islands. Compare that with the center of Europe. Germany's at the center of Western Europe. There was always wars between one nation or the other, and Germany was always in the center. So you think that democratic institutions can take hold there? When you had 30-year wars, 100-year wars, I mean, it goes on and on. It's extraordinary. The reason that America was a successful experiment in the world is because it's essentially an island. Well, the Mexicans weren't going to attack you. Canadians were peaceful. You got rid of the Indians. So we had time to allow democratic institutions to slowly grow. And they're even being questioned now, here and there. It took till 1965 to get the Voting Rights Act. So democracy takes a while to take hold. You don't come in somewhere in Iraq, Afghanistan, and defeat their army and say, okay, now you have a democracy. You kidding? It takes a while. Look how haltingly it happened in England and in America. Islands, really. So, but the American influence in Germany has been enormous and enormously positive, I have to say. Without America, during the Cold War, Russia would have attacked Western Europe without American troops. There was the Berlin airlift in the 40s, where Berlin was cut off because of the Russian occupation. NATO was created essentially because of America's leadership. It provided a bulwark against Russian aggression, and there would have been, no question about it. It is America and George Bush Sr. and Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's importance is so misunderstood by most people. Never mind his domestic policies. What the Republican Party talks about is all BS. But think about his foreign policy accomplishments. Ronald Reagan had the humanity to approach Gorbachev on a one-to-one basis. And it's because of that that America created a rapprochement with the Soviet Union. Those two, Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev, arguably the most two important people in the second half of the 20th century. You don't know how close we were to a cataclysmic Third World War. This close. The Russian marshals were waiting for Gorbachev to give the signal when the rebellion started in East Germany and Czechoslovakia to go send the tanks. But Reagan, and I deeply admire him for that, had the wisdom, the humanity to say, I want to talk to that man, man to man. I've met Gorbachev, I met Reagan, I gave a speech for both of them, and impressed with both of them as human beings. But Reagan is the one who created that bridge. Let's not forget that. And Bush Sr. is the one who made German reunification possible. Mitterrand didn't want it. Margaret Thatcher didn't want it. Bush Sr. said, yes, let's do it.
You never know what's going to capture the imagination of the American public,
No.
whether it be world leaders
Right.
or even in the case of the Rat Patrol.
Right.
It ended in 1968,
Right.
and yet there's kind of a cult around it. People are still, interested in it. There's like a website, conventions. Why do you think that is?
Because it was a more innocent time in a sense. It was a time where, and rightfully so, the enemy was an enemy. The Nazis were the embodiment of the enemy. No two ways about that. No two ways about that. They needed to be defeated. So it was clear There's a clarity to that war. No wonder it's one of America's finest hours. But it's also Russia's finest hour. We keep on forgetting Russia. They sacrificed enormously to defeat the Nazis. But it certainly is America's finest hour as well.
You had been juggling both television and feature films up to this point, and you did some more films after the Rat Patrol ended. I'm going to ask you to make a quick comment or anecdote about. I'm going to mention a film, and if you just from your experience or working on it, 100 Rifles with Raquel Welch.
Tommy Grice directed that. We did that in Spain. This was after the Rat Patrol. I went back to Spain, and it was with Raquel Welch, who was extraordinarily beautiful. And Burt Reynolds, and good athlete, and the most incomparable athlete, Jim Brown, and
Fernando Lamas was in it, right?
And Fernando Lamas, who was a very funny character, and he was a Latin bull, and he was married to and lived with Esther Williams, who was wonderful, and still is a friend. And that was quite an experience. In the south of Spain, Almeria and Granada, and Jim Brown was an impressive figure. I've always, as I said, been interested in sports, and he arguably was one of the great athletes of all time. And beyond that, as a film, I don't remember much of it,
What about, you were in the second sequel, the third in the series of the Planet of the Apes movies,
Yeah.
the Escape from the Planet of the Apes.
Right.
How did you come to be cast in that, and what was that like working with Roddy McDowall?
Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter, and I didn't see much of them. They were very nice, of course. I felt very sorry for them because they had to be in the makeup room at 3 a.m. And they did that every day with enormous discipline. They sat in the makeup chair for 5-6 hours. And Don Taylor directed it. He was a former actor. Very nice man, good director. I think actors make good directors. And did I like the part? No, not really. It was again sort of a caricature, But I remember Arthur Jacobs and his wife Natalie. They had a house in Beverly Drive, and I had always made it a rule in my life, my professional life, never to go to parties given by directors or producers, never. I'm too arrogant for that. I never wanted to evoke the impression that I was there to maybe get a job, couldn't care less. So, because I had known a lot of actors who knew a lot of people in this business and never got work, because in the end it's a business. They don't give a shit whether you live on the moon or not. They want you to perform and that's it. So, I remember Arthur and Natalie both inviting us over to their house. And I said, thank you very much, but no. And so they said, well, we have a ping pong tournament. I said, I'm in, anything with sports. So it was part of the tournament where Walter Matthau and Dick Zanuck and Wendell Niles, some other people. So that's how we started going over to Arthur Jacobs' house. And he wanted me to star in a film called The Aquanauts at 20th. And huge science fiction, underwater venture. And we already were doing testing with long, invisible things from the ceiling of the studio 20th. And then he died. He passed away. Arthur passed away. Nice man, good man. Natalie they were wonderful, charming hosts. Working with Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter was a very nice experience. Don Taylor was a very good director. So I had a good time. When was that?
Must have been 69 or so. No, probably. Well, I think Planet of the Apes was around 68.
Was it after Colossus or before?
I believe it was before.
I don't think so.
Or,
I think
it would have been 70, 71 probably.
I think it was after Colossus.
When was Colossus?
Well, you know, Colossus was in 1969,
Okay,
I think, 8 or 9.
Probably so after.
But let me tell you a story about that. I was doing 100 Rifles in Spain, and I got a call to, could I quickly fly to Los Angeles, to Hollywood, and do a screen test at Universal Studios for a film called Colossus, the Forbin Project. I flew back, did the screen test, flew back to Spain to finish 100 Rifles. I was sharing an apartment. My wife and I were sharing a huge flat with Fernando Lamas and Esther Williams. And I remember the call came in from Alex Brewers, the agency. Said, Lou Wasserman loved the test, wants you to play the lead in the picture as an American scientist. And I thought, whoa. He says, but, I said, what? He says, he wants you to change your name. I said, no, I won't do it. I'm not going to do it. He says, well, let me call you back in about an hour. So I told my wife, who has always been enormously important in some of those very important decisions in my life. And she says, remember what Kurt Jürgens told you, and remember the fate of Maximilian Schell and Horst Buchholz. They have played nothing but Nazis, and you have always wanted to get out of that. And that made sense. And then began the search for a name. And I took a new name to the set of 100 Rifles every day, and we were trying it out, and they said, don't change your name. I said, well, you're not in my shoes. So I took the first part of the village I came from in Germany called Braeden. And Eric is a Northern European name, could be British, could be anything. And hence Eric Braeden and Lou Wasserman, they liked it, and they said, okay. But I felt very strange about it for a long time. And then I did Colossus, and Joe Sargent directed, and Stanley Chase produced. Two very nice people. Joe Sargent was a wonderful director. And we did it on stage 12 at Universal Studios. And when you suddenly star in a film, things change very quickly. It's an uncanny feeling, a very disconcerting feeling, a very unbalancing feeling when you suddenly star. Let me give you an example of how that changes things. They used to have a commissary at Universal Studios where everyone had lunch. And I'd done a lot of Run for Your Lives and all kinds of television shows, and you always saw, punctually I think at 1, Lou Wasserman walk in with the suits, Sid Sheinberg and various other people, about 5 or 6. They always moved to the back table, and they walked in regally, like a king, that Lou was. And they sort of passed every table. So suddenly you star in a film, and that entourage stops at your table. So Lou Wasserman's, Eric, how are you? Now imagine how unsettling this is. A new name, suddenly the most powerful man in town stops at your table and says hello. So it's a very unsettling feeling. Spielberg was on the set almost every day watching. I didn't know him then. And Joe Sargent was the director. Wonderful man. Was an actor before. Great man. And Stanley Chase was very supportive, very nice, the producer. And Susan Clark was in it, and George Savile Brown, and Gordon Pinsent, and William Shallot, a wonderful cast. That is arguably one of the most pivotal moments of my career.
And that was the first screen credit as Eric Braeden?
Yes, and the first starring role.
Was it important to you that you were one of the first, or maybe the first German actor who was cast in a major film as an American?
You bet. You bet.
Like a breakthrough?
Meant everything. The biggest breakthrough of all time. No other German actor had ever done it, or has ever done it, ever. And about a year later, it came out in 70, and the first 3 years, 70, 73, 74, they made no films in Hollywood, almost none. Universal was the only game in town. They had wanted me to sign an all-inclusive contract, television and film. I said, no, no television, just film. It was an egregious mistake at the time, because television turned out to be the only game in town. There was an agency in town called Chase and Park Citron. They represented Tony Curtis and Anthony Quinn and Jimmy Stewart and all those people who suddenly were doing television because there were no films around. And they approached me, and Herman Citron took me to lunch at the Hillcrest Country Club and said, we want to represent you. You'll be a big star one day, but don't do any television. It's going to be tough for about 2 or 3 years. They knew. They were friends of Lou Wasserman's. They knew the financial conditions of this town. And I said, okay. And I held out for about 3 or 4 months. I had a family. So I started guest starring again. And at that time you couldn't do that. You couldn't star in a film and then go back to television. It was a no-no.
Let me ask you about some of those guest starring roles.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
But then what came out of that,
yeah.
Cubby Broccoli from James Bond
Okay.
had seen Colossus.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know anything about Hans Grudiger, because movie producers didn't watch television. He didn't know. He just saw the film. He said, oh, that might be an interesting new James Bond. Because a lot of people had always thought that it was somehow from the British Commonwealth. They couldn't quite figure it out. And Alex Ruiz, the agent, and I went to his house near Doheny somewhere, had lunch. And he said, do you still have a British passport? I said, I have a German passport. And the curtain went down like this. And he said, no one would play James Bond but someone who was a member of the British Commonwealth. Not even an American actor. So that was the end of that. So now ask me about the guest starring roles.
That was so you were this close, except for in his eyes the wrong passport.
Yes, precisely.
Wow, that would have been a whole new turn for you.
Whole new turn.
Mission Impossible. Was that a show you enjoyed being on?
Yeah, yeah. Peter Graves was a very nice man. Barbara Bain. I think Martin Landau was on it later on, wasn't he? Very good. They were good actors, very nice people. Yes, I enjoyed that. Yeah, I did.
Were you cast as a villain in these?
Oh, sure. Peter Rutten. One of the big ones was the Russian spy who quoted Shakespeare, but who kissed Barbara Bain.
Mm-hmm, right. Gunsmoke.
One of my most favorite memories. I loved that show. I loved everyone on it. It was one of the most professionally done shows. John Mantley was the executive producer, and he was a hell of a producer. The Macavity brothers were directing. They were very good. And James Arness, I can't say enough about, is a wonderfully nice man, just a big man, 6'6", huge man. When he laughed like a horse, and it was a very infectious laughter. And Kitty and Doc, all those, Festus, they're wonderful people, very nice people, I must say. We did that on Laurel Canyon and Ventura at CBS Studios.
Who did you do most of your scenes with? Was it James Arness?
I don't remember. No, not too many I played the guest star. I did 5 of them. Mm-hmm. The Gold Train, and then 2 others. The 3-parter was the Gold Train. And
so the 3-parter, you played one character, but
yes,
you played another character in a
yes,
different. Okay.
Yeah. Loved it.
Was this toward the end of this Gunsmoke's run? They ran for
towards the end.
Like 20 years, I guess.
It was towards the end. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
A well-oiled machine. And what's his name? One of the producers, is it Katz or Katzman? Katz? He later on became producer for Lorimar. He did a lot of the Dallas things, I think. Right. Forget his name now.
Yeah, I think I know who you mean. Katzman, is it? Or
Katzman or Katz? I forget. And they were all very nice people. Very nice. And there's nothing but, we filmed some of it up in Northern California in Sonoma County. And I remember we partied, oh man, we partied till 5, 6 in the morning, and the call was at 7:30.
And you were in an episode of a sitcom that was one of the more iconic 70s sitcoms, The Mary Tyler Moore Show.
I loved
What was
that
that experience like, especially with comedy?
Wonderful. I loved it. Mary Tyler Moore couldn't have been more charming. Sweet lady. Ted Knight I knew from before. I knew Ted from when he, played little parts here and there.
He played German
Yeah, he did
parts
that
too
too.
before.
He did that too. Ed Asner, I've always had respect for. I knew Ed from before. Gavin MacLeod was with the same agency I'd been with.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew these people before. Very nice atmosphere.
What was your episode about, or what was your character?
I played a Paul Simon character. Remember that very cynical, satirical, intellectual critic, Paul Simon. And I played a food critic. No, I played a critic of a cultural critic.
Mm-hmm.
And with enormous arrogance and what have you. And then Betty White, I chastised them all. I said, this is not the bourgeois, this is the bourgeoisie. And Ted Knight came walking in towards the end, and just at a certain propitious moment, he put a pie in my face. It was the end of the show. I loved doing that show. I really loved it. They were wonderful.
And the episode was called The Critic, in fact.
Yes.
Was that your first sitcom role?
Yeah. Mm. I'd love to do comedy.
Was comedy something that you had wanted to do, or?
No. But I would love doing it. Yeah.
With steady work in television, you did, you must be over 100 different episodes.
Right.
At least.
Right.
Did you enjoy that kind of routine as an actor?
I love to work.
Of guest starring?
I love to work. No, I didn't like the guest starring thing. Okay. Not particularly. I would have preferred to star in a series or star in films. But short of that, I was very lucky, No, because you always play the bad guy. So the high 5-0s, I remember, FBIs, worked for Quinn Martin many times, and always played the bad guy, and I was tired of that, to be honest with you, but very grateful to have the job. There are 150,000 registered actors in Hollywood. 150,000, of which 1% make a living. Think about that. So I'm very lucky. Yeah.
So how did you come to the role of Victor Newman in The Young and the Restless? This is around 1980?
1980.
Okay.
Someone had told me about soaps, and I said, what are soaps? I never watched television, never watched episodic television except the few times that I was on. I was enamored of Ingmar Bergman and Fellini and Godard and Kubrick and what have you, and television basically didn't interest me. And I remember at Arthur Jacobs' parties, the head of NBC Daytime said, why don't you come by, maybe, star in one of those things or whatever. I thought, so never was interested. And then they said, well, they'd like you for 3 months. Would you go and meet them? So I met them. And very reluctant. But I signed for 3 months. Hated it, the first 3 months, because of the enormous speed, the lack of respect. What is endemic in daytime television is sort of a lack of respect for the medium by everyone who is involved with it, except for Bill Bell, who had great respect for it, obviously. But so the entire atmosphere, from stage managers to crew to everyone, just sort of thought they were doing, and I thought, why do you people think that? It's the hardest work there is in television. No one works harder. So I just, the whole atmosphere I didn't like. I wanted out after 3 months. And then Bill wanted me to stay longer. Would you sign for a year? So, it's okay. And after the year, the first year, I was so depressed, I said, I gotta get out of here. I can't do this. Again, because of this, the appetite of daytime is so enormous. It's so avaricious. It just eats you up unless you gain the right perspective. And again, I long talked with my wife. And she said, why don't you use this as a challenge and instead of fighting it all the time? And then we changed producers somewhere in our, because some things needed to be changed. But they said, no, this is written in stone. You can't change anything. I said, you must be kidding. Shakespeare changed things. Serious? Every set I've ever been on, they changed things. Ad hoc. And then Wes Kinney came, the producer Wes Kinney. And he's the reason I stayed on that show. Because when I went to Wes and said, this doesn't make any sense, how about changing? He said, damn right, absolutely, boom. He trusted my instincts. And then another producer called Ed Scott, who had learned from Wes Kinney, also was willing to listen. And Bill knew I changed some things, but he never let it be known that he knew. Because he knew that I did it for the best interest of the show. And I never changed characters or whatever, nothing like that, but sometimes this is a visual medium we are in, television. It ain't radio, it ain't talk. It's visual.
When you met with William Bell early on, when you
Right.
were first hired, how did he present to you the character of Victor Newman? What was the original character like?
Just a bad guy. Just very bad. He, just an evil son of a bitch. And I had a discussion with him. I said, I had enormous respect for Bill. And I said, and I think it was mutual. And I said, Bill, I have played bad guys for so many years, I'm empty. I can't do it anymore. Can we somehow assign something to the background of this character that explains why he is who he is, that gives him a sociological background, that justifies who he is. And then I remember a storyline was Christmas, I forget what year, where Nikki, Melody Thomas Scott, never knew anything about my past, and she asked me some questions about my past, my childhood, which had been a mystery until then. And I opened up for the first time. And Bill Bell had come up with a wonderful story. That is really the reason I'm still there. He gave this man a background where he was left in an orphanage at the age of 7 by his parents, his destitute parents. The moment I played that thing, I knew I was going to stay because it humanized the character. And it allowed the character a vulnerability, a humanity, and explained why he was tough, angry, and yet could be, if approached the right way, vulnerable, gentle, and boy, Bill knew how to do that. He just wrote a wonderful character. And there was another scene I did with Dorothy McGuire a little later, where she's my mother and she comes to visit me after 30 years. I don't trust her. I said, you're my mother, you might be an imposter after my money. And I had no idea how I was going to play that scene. She was wonderful, Dorothy McGuire. And I had no idea. I knew the dialogue, knew the words, but no idea how I was going to play it. And we did the scene, and it's one of my all-time favorite scenes. Did it one take. It's a mixture of anger, sadness, enormous sadness and anger, both mixed. I knew she was my mother because brilliantly they had written that she talks about the fact that I had a hole in my sweater, and only she could have known that. I knew then she was not an imposter, but she was indeed my mother. I'll never forget that moment. So those two, that was Bill Bell's brilliance, though. He knew how to do that, you know?
You mentioned two producers who came in that were also very important to you in that they accepted the fact that when you had ideas that made sense,
yes,
they agreed with them.
Yes.
What were some of maybe the specific changes or ideas that you had for your character?
Too much dialogue, sometimes too many words, too much exposition, where you explain everything. You don't need to do that. You can do that with your eyes, with your expression, with your mood. You don't need to. It's like pissing in the wind, you know? Too much is too much. And yet the writers in daytime have a very difficult task because they need to write so much in order to fill an hour. So their hands are sometimes tied. I understand that, and I have empathy with that.
Did this have to do with respect of the audience too? That you didn't have to explain everything?
Precisely.
The exposition was like...
Audience is much smarter than Hollywood gives it credit for. Much smarter. That is one thing I learned on the show by doing public appearances everywhere. In the provinces, in the sticks of Canada and of America, in the South and the North and the West and the East, everywhere. Small towns, they are much smarter than you think they are. They really are. There's a condescension in Hollywood towards that unwashed audience, my ass. They know. They know. So this has taught me a lot. It has also taught me the importance of getting in touch with the audience that you play to. A lot of the behavior of actors in this town comes from not being in contact with those they touch. So you become cynical. You sort of look at the whole thing as a sort of cynical. Well, once you meet those people that you affect, you change your mind about that. You become more modest about it. And you become far more understanding and far more serious about what you do. You don't throw it away. Because you realize what you do has indeed an effect on people. Enormous. I can tell you stories till the cows come in. We won't do that. But it's enormous, and I have great respect for the audience. I've learned that. So I'm deeply grateful to this series. Deeply grateful. And deeply grateful to Bill Bell. Yeah.
When Victor Newman first arrived in Genoa City, do you remember how he was introduced? Or...
I played a rancher, very wealthy rancher. I think I was introduced by suing some innocent girl in court or whatever they had done. She had done something, I forget what. And it was mean-spirited and, you know, yeah.
What about, you've spoken about your unhappiness in that first period, especially up to the first year. What about the adjustment as an actor? You said you had a facility for memorizing very quickly, but the fact you had to remember so much dialogue, so many pages compared to film, what kind of adjustment was that for you?
It became a challenge. And then you know, Melody Thomas Scott, who was very quick study, great sense of humor. You sort of almost made it a competition to learn it in the last minute. See if you could still do it, you know? And of course, what is the essence of what we do? Is to make something that someone else wrote real. Right. That's the essence of acting. And you know what's the most difficult? Is to do those simple scenes. to make them seem real is the most difficult.
Let me ask you this. How do you make what on paper, when people talk about it, seems like in some ways kind of a lot of crazy characters. How do you make that real?
That's an actor's responsibility. That is you find something. You find something in it. You find something in the person you play against. You find something suddenly. You get motivated by what you hear in the crew. If someone pisses you off, is not quiet enough or whatever, you use that. You use everything in order to get done what you need done. If you need to be angry at something, you imagine the situation, or you find something in the opposing actor that you say, oh, you're challenging me? Are you kidding or what? Do you understand? You just, it's the ability to, in a very facile way, to get into certain moods. And of course your life experience has a lot to do with that as well. So it's allowing access to all kinds of emotions.
So was it the humanizing of Victor Newman that really kept you engaged?
Yes, no question about it. And the money. Of course, and the money. You gotta raise a family.
Are there any actors' tricks about memorizing so much dialogue in a short amount of time when you only had maybe 1 or 2 takes at the most?
That's a very good question. And I think I don't actually know how I learn. I still don't know. I think I know one thing. You need to emotionally identify with what you're saying. You need to understand it. The worst example of that is when I did a thing called Blue Light with Robert Goulet, a dreadful series again about the Second World War, at the old Goldwyn Studios. Goes back to the 60s. And I was always very cavalier about learning my dialogue because I learned very quickly. So I didn't really look at this. So suddenly I said, oh shit. It was about, I played a spy who used all kinds of baseball terminology. I know nothing about baseball. And mathematical terminology. And I loathed mathematics in school. So I looked at this and said, oh shit. Well, it's the only time I ever did 15 takes in a scene. Couldn't get it. And I said, well, you better never do that again. So, the most difficult thing in memorization was an evening of 14 Shakespearean monologues from 9 different Shakespearean plays. I did that in one sitting. And I never should have done that.
Live? You performed live?
Live. Perform live on stage. And we should have done that 20, 30, 40 times because that's too overwhelming. But I did it. If I talk about being scared, it's petrifying. You get up at night to take a leak, but there's noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows. You go back to bed, and ask the winter what is content made glorious summer. Do you understand? It goes on, and it's like a tunnel. Yeah. It becomes narrow and narrow and narrow the closer you get to opening night. And then you sit in your dressing room, and you hear them come in, and suddenly you say, shit. If you forget one line in Shakespeare, the whole thing falls apart like a house of cards. 14 monologues from 9 different plays. Insane. Yeah. Never been so scared in my life. Worse than opening night on Broadway. Much worse. When I was finished with that, I felt such relief. I remember afterwards we'd out and partied, and I saw LA the next morning. Such relief. You have no idea.
Did fear help you as an actor?
Huh?
Did fear help you as an actor?
That's a good question. Fear is only good if it's not too overwhelming. It's like in sports. You know, when we played for the U.S. Championship in soccer, I won the championship 72-73. And before the final game, boy, are you nervous. But at least you have something to get it out of your system. 5-10 minutes into the game, you are an oxygen debt and you forget everything. So before plays or whatever, I used to shadow box a lot, you know, just to get out of breath. Bam, bam. And yeah.
So how did fans take to Victor Newman in the very beginning? What kind of fan mail did you get from the viewers?
I don't know at the very beginning. Didn't pay much attention to it at the very beginning. Then later on, wonderful mail, usually. Wonderful mail. I have never, out of all the public appearances I've done, and quite a few, in America, in Canada, in France, in Europe, in Israel, never evoked a bad reaction. Maybe once, you know? And always warm, always embracing, always understanding the character you play. It has been a wonderful experience, I gotta tell you.
How was working with Meg Bennett, who played Victor's wife, Julia?
Meg was extremely bright. She's a very bright lady. Beautiful woman. And they always imitated, the crew always imitated my shouting for Julia, Julia! So, we had a stage manager called Willie Dahl. We used to work with Carol Burnett and all these people, and he always said, Julia! So.
Did Victor Newman's attitude toward women change through the show, throughout the time you played him?
No, not really. I mean, not really. But I have a very particular beef about that in American television. I think that men are made fools of in American television, by and large, mostly in commercials. The man, the father, is always the doofus. He's the idiot. It's obnoxious. And some of that sometimes bleeds into the writing. I refuse to go along with it. I will not. Simply will not.
So what is Victor's attitude?
Well, meaning that his attitude simply is that he will not be dictated to by a woman. But he will not be dictated to by anyone. Won't. In other words, I always say, if a man talked to me like that, I'd knock him on his ass. It's an invitation to a fight, period. Why does a woman have the right to do that? You kidding? Conversely, I as a man don't have the right to talk down to a woman. It's about mutual respect. That is what you don't see in a lot of American television anymore. The guy is the schmuck. He's the idiot. Really think about it. You see it in commercials, you see it in comedies, you see it even in serious television very often. It's a question of mutual respect between the sexes. It is not that one dominates the other. It's a question of mutual respect. So simple, but very often the writers forget it. And then you have suddenly the woman making an ass of the man. Ain't going to happen with Victor Newman. Not going to happen with me.
How do you feel
the
about
same thing happens to, though, if one of the young punks come into a scene and want to throw their weight around. They show no respect, watch out. Simple as it is. It's a very simple rule. And that comes from the world of sports. In the world of sports, you don't bullshit. You don't say to someone, hey, you bab, 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 bab. This is what happens very quickly. That's why sports is so important. You learn respect for the other human being. Because everyone is dangerous. As soon as there are feelings of omnipotence, as soon as a man or as a woman you walk around and say, well, when I throw my weight around, bullshit. Don't ever underestimate anyone. Always treat them with respect.
How do you feel about, in the fans' great love for Victor Newman, the fact that one of their greatest loves is they love to hate him?
Mm-hmm.
Is that amusing to you? Is it satisfying to you?
I have never really felt that. I never really felt that. You would have to talk to audiences away from me, because when I've encountered them, it's been nothing but just an outpouring of warmth and emotion, and I've never experienced that.
What do they tell you that they do love about your character?
I don't know. I think it's the complexity of the character, because he's at once vulnerable and yet revengeful and vengeful. He gets even. Sports Illustrated did an article about this character, where they interviewed the Yankees and George Foreman and Tommy Hearns and the Raiders and basketball. And what the male players liked is the fact that Victor Newman doesn't take any shit. There was an article recently that came out about prisoners. It's their favorite character because he doesn't take any shit. He gets even. So, because everyone wants to be respected. So it's more complex than they love to hate. It's more complex than that, much more complex than that.
Can you just describe the relationship between Victor and Nikki in the beginning?
Well, at the beginning they wrote it sort of as a you know, the domineering husband, and she was the former stripper. But, you know, Nikki held her own, always. So it was that kind of battle, you know.
What was it about Nikki that Victor was attracted to, do you think?
Her vulnerability, her honesty, her sexiness, she gave as good as she took, you know, and it was sort of an equal thing in many ways. Yeah.
Did fans react to that? When you became involved with the character?
To be honest with you, I don't know that question. I can't answer that question. Whether they... I have always never wanted to know exactly what people feel. I sort of rather leave it alone, and it's going well, so don't ask too many questions. I don't want to analyze it. I play what I feel is right. I don't want to be influenced by what people on the outside may think. It either resonates with the audience or it does not.
Do you think that for the character of Victor to kind of fall in love with Nikki, was that a turning point for the character?
Yes. Yeah. It is rare in television, it's rare in movies, it's rare that either as a single actor or as a combination with an actress, you evoke something in the audience, whatever that is. I don't know what it is. And I don't want to know. I don't want to dissect it. I really don't.
Is it like a dance between actors when there's that chemistry there?
Yes, but I think one of the most essential things in acting is to show vulnerability. And I think that is what people are partly attracted to in this character. He's vulnerable. He's not only tough and hard, he's vulnerable as well. And so is Nikki, very vulnerable. And I think it's that which touches people.
Through the years, the characters have come back together time and time again,
Yeah.
and some fans have referred to them as a super couple. How do you react to that?
Wonderful. I mean, as long as that, lasts and they feel that way, I'm very grateful. It's great. Yeah.
Playing the scenes with Melody, is that a pleasurable experience for you?
Oh, totally. Always has been. She's been wonderful to work with. Wonderful to work with. Great sense of humor. I wish they would tape some of her rehearsals. She's wonderful to work with. Yeah.
In terms of the characters, what do you think it is about the characters that they do tend to keep coming back to each other? Or finding each other?
Mm-hmm. I think it is that when they part very vociferously, very passionately, very never see you again, never, blah, 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 blah. And I think it is overcoming that kind of hostile and seemingly irreconcilable parting, to overcome that again. There's some relationships like that. Think of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, for example. It's and then they're attracted to each other as well. And I think maybe they become addicted to the overcoming of it.